Jesus has come to preach good news to the poor, proclaim release to the captives.
Hello, friends, and welcome to our interview series, which is called 100 Years of Song. My name is Mike McMahon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And it is my great privilege today to be speaking with I-to Loh, who is a fellow of the Hymn Society and has a long and distinguished career in promoting and enlivening congregational song, particularly in Asia. He has taught Asian and global church music, ethnomusicology and worship at the Asian Institute for Liturgy and Music in Manila, at the Tainan Theological College and Seminary in Taiwan, and at various institutions in Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and the United States. He served as a leader and advisor to the World Council of Churches and the Christian Conference of Asia General Assemblies, and has given workshops for both of those organizations. His publications include more than 300 hymns and anthems. He's compiled more than 23 collections of hymns, including Sound the Bamboo and its companion Asian hymns in their cultural and liturgical contexts. He most recently served as editor of the most recent Presbyterian Hymnal in Taiwan, and just completed a companion to that hymnal, which is going to be hot off the presses very, very soon. So it's really just such a pleasure to welcome you, I-to, and to have this opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. It's an honor, and I'm very happy to be able to talk with you.
Thank you. And I just want everybody to know that we've pre-recorded this interview, so people are not going to be able to ask questions directly. But for those of you who are watching, you can, in fact, put questions or comments in the chat, and we will gather all those up, and we'll send those to I-to after the interview has aired live on Monday, December the 11th. So yes. You also need to know that he and I are 13 hours apart. I'm sitting here in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where it's shortly after 8 o'clock in the evening, and he is in Tainan, Taiwan, where it is just after 9 o'clock in the morning the next day. Right. Not only we're not at the same time, we're not even on the same day. So,
yes, I'll be very happy to receive any emails. Please use my, Gmail, and then I definitely would answer through Gmail. Yes.
Okay. In fact, we'll put your email address in the chat when we do the live broadcast of this session, so that people can have that. Okay. Well, thanks for being with us again. And I'd like to just jump right in and ask you how you got into all this. What was your upbringing like? How did you get involved in church and music and ministry? What got you there?
Yes, it's really a long story, but I have to put it short.
Okay.
I was born as a PK because my dad, was an evangelist and pastor, and he's also an amateur musician. But most of his life was dedicated to work among the Aborigines in Taiwan for the later 20 years of his work. So I followed him and worked with him and listened to his singing and his teaching. And so naturally, we grew up in the church. And then also, I attended a Taiwanese church, Taiwanese-speaking church from childhood. And so we sang hymns, and during youth groups and choirs, everything we sang was 100% Western hymns. So during those times, I could memorize hundreds of Western hymns in Taiwanese. And so singing of hymns became part of my important life, and also musical experience in church. And so naturally, I began to appreciate, good church music from the West. And then I entered the seminary. I wanted to prepare myself to help my dad in his ministry. But then in seminary, my teachers, and also the president of the seminary, Shoki Ko, who discovered my talent and interest in music, And so Shogiko appointed me to study church music. So that really helped me to focus, my life and work in church music rather than just playing ministry.
Right. So where did you study church music?
Yes, after my graduation from seminary, I already took some basic courses, in church music, hymnology and conducting and theory and everything. But then I went to Union Seminary in New York for my master's degree in church music. And I studied with Joseph Goodman, who was a very good, professor of composition, who helped me to formalize my own way of composition. Because in Taiwan, I already knew that I did not want to follow or just copy the Western tradition. I felt that as a Taiwanese, I have to develop something which has more Taiwanese flavor, but I did not know how. But going to the States, studying with Professor Goodman, and I told him what I wanted to do because he did not know anything about Chinese music or Taiwanese music. So I had to explain to him my principle. And then based on that, he tried to criticize me if I am against my own principle. So it was very interesting because my basic approach is to use 5-tone scale, do, re, mi, so, la, without half-tone progression, which is typical of Taiwanese or Chinese or a lot of Asian music. So I try to use only 5 tones. But as you know, when you compose an anthem, if you only use 5 tones, you get bored. And also, if you don't have any harmony, nobody wants to sing. Because in Taiwan, we were all trained to appreciate singing hymns in 4-part harmony.
Wow.
And so any anthem should be in 4-part harmony. But then with 5-tone scales and doing 4-part harmony, you'd ruin the whole thing. So I have to try to find out in certain way I can break away from Western harmony and also break away from the limitation of 5-tone scales. So that took me a lot of time. It was until the second year of my study with him that I began to find out exactly how, to prevent from being too much influence from Western tradition. Now, because in our Taiwanese language, we are tonal. That means the change of tone will change the meaning. And so I have to be very careful about the melodic flow, of the music so that people could understand. But then I don't want to add 4-part harmony. So Bach is my idol. I really like Bach. And so his counterpoint became my model. So my composition is more contrapuntal. I usually write 2 to 3 parts. I don't like to write 4 parts because it'll be too complex, with 4 parts together, especially when it's not using the strict Western harmony. And so I try to develop my composition through that. And that really, my composition teacher, Joseph Goodman, was very impressed, when I composed that one. And he felt that, that was very good. But then after coming back, when I try to show, to teach our people to sing, nobody wants to sing because they're too foreign to them. I thought it was Taiwanese, but to our people who are more used to singing everything Western, they felt, the music was very strange. There is no so-called harmonic beauty because there were no chords. And so people refused to sing. And it took me a long time to try to convince our people to sing. And that Christmas cantata, The Prince of Peace, that I composed, was performed the second year after I returned, and then never performed again until about 50 years later. One of my former students perform that again. So for 50 years, nobody wanted to sing that. So you can understand how our people feel about music. To them, their music is Western. You know, the Western language, Western concept of beauty, and that's what they like. And so my own, although I compose them for Taiwan, I want to show Taiwanese features, but then our own people don't want that. So this has been the most difficult thing about my effort in doing contextualization of church music in Taiwan, as well as in many Asian countries.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to get to contextualization in a moment, but before we get there, I wanted to ask you about the relationship between the 5-tone scale and the tonality of the language. Is there in fact a relationship between those two?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. 5-tone scales, you know, we will say do, re, mi, so, la, C, D, E, G, A, without the B or without the F, without fa and T or C. So a lot of songs, folk songs, are using only those 5 tones. But then if you listen carefully, in a lot of folk songs, they do have fa or C, but then the C is a little bit lower and the fa is a little bit higher, because that's really the Chinese theory about, you know, about the fa and the C, because they have different theories. But of course, among the folk people, they don't care much about those. They just sing, and then the half-tone scale, the half-tone progression would happen, not mi fa so, but mi fi so, and then if you go you know, kind of descending, it's not so fa mi, but so fi mi, or do si la. The C could be a little bit lower. So in my attempt to compose, I try to avoid, you know, too much of, you know, kind of a half-tone progression upward. I usually do downward. But if I do downward, it'll be so fi mi or do ti la. Upward will be mi fi so, but not la ti do, because that's the feeling of 5-tone scale. So I have to limit one section with 5-tone scale, but then I have to modulate modulate to another new key. But the modulation is without using chord. Using the introduction of fa, the do, re, mi, so, become do, re, fa, so, then do, re, fa, so becomes so, ra, do, re. That creates another 5-tone scale. So in this way, I try to modulate, you know, many times in my anthem, sometimes 4 or 5 times, and then later on it comes back to the beginning. And that's why people found it very hard to sing. And I had to really convince people to have the different, you know, musical aesthetics to be able to appreciate it. Yes.
Right. And in your writing you were doing, were you writing in Taiwanese or were you writing in Mandarin?
Mostly in Taiwanese, but also I compose sometimes in Mandarin, because Taiwanese has 7 tones and Chinese has only 4 tones. So it's easier to compose in Chinese, and then for our Taiwanese is more complex. But then, as you know, like hymns, I compose first stanza according to the natural intonation, but then the second stanza, the texts are already different. So it's very difficult to fit. But at least my effort is that at least people would understand it through the first stanza. And the second stanza on, since they already know the music, and so it'll be easier for them to sing. But of course, if you don't listen carefully, a lot of intonation would change the meaning. For instance, say Jesus teaches the people, Ya so ka shi lang, Yaso Kashi Lang. Kashi is to teach. But then he said, Yaso Kashi Lang. That means Jesus beat people to death.
Oh,
See,
no.
Kashi is going down. But
Right.
if you go up, that means biting people to death. That's the problem of our language.
So
and that's why I try to convince our people that we have to do everything to avoid that kind of misunderstanding by listeners, because people in church, they already understand. People outside, they don't understand. So, their imagination will be quite different.
sure.
But it's a very difficult task. As you know, I said we have translated all our hymns, and more than 98% of translation from the West. And most of the translations, if I say probably more than 95% translations, don't follow the intonation of the text and the music.
Right.
So you have to have a lot of imagination, to understand the meaning. But of course, for new compositions, and especially when I compose new hymns, I always follow my own rule, so that I hope that would convince the people, to let the people understand what they're, listening. Yeah, but it's a very difficult process.
Has there been any effort to retranslate some of the old hymns to be more faithful to tonalities?
I know that they are trying this very much in Hong Kong.
Yes, I was reading an
have
article just today about it in Hong Kong, about Cantonese. Yes.
Right, because the Cantonese has 9 tones, not only 7. We have 7, but Cantonese has 9 tones. And I have 2 friends in Hong Kong who are doing very well in translating according to the tonal, inflation, inflections, on those. But in Taiwanese, not that many people are interested in doing that, because it'll be impossible, to be faithful to the original meaning, at the same time to, match the tonal progression with the musical flow. It's almost impossible, almost. But of course, with careful translation, we might be able to do so, but with the expense of sacrificing the original meaning or the poetic beauty, which is actually quite difficult. That's why a lot of people don't like to compose or translate hymns in Taiwanese.
Right. So related to that, so are there any new texts being written in Taiwanese to the old tunes?
Yeah, yes, there are people doing that, but then there are also people composing new tunes. But I would say probably more than 95% of them would compose in Western scales, in Western style, and with Western harmony, because this is the way they want. Very few people, except if they were my former students, they would compose in Taiwanese style. And they might even try to compose, without the, Western traditional harmony, but only a few. Right. All the rest, there are a lot of composers, they just want to compose in Western way. And now in the university circles, there are hundreds of composers. They can compose avant-garde music, no problem. But they are not interested in composing hymns as such. They felt that the hymn is so limited, they cannot really develop or show off their skills in composition. So there are quite a number of Christians. Actually, a lot of musicians are Christians, but they are not happy about church music because the church is only singing gospel songs or praise choruses. And not too many churches can sing anthems by Bach or Hymnal. They do sing Messiah and Elijah and creation, once or twice a year. But the rest of the churches, they only sing simple hymns or anthems. And so the composers, they're not that interested in composing hymns or anthems. That's really my problem. I felt I don't know what to do because I composed some. I've just published, about that's about nearly 70 or 80 anthems that I composed.
Wow.
But not many people are buying it, and I have to give away and to try to encourage people to sing. But I don't know when they're going to sing. Yeah.
I'm wondering also how the state of church music is related to secular music in Taiwan. Or is that also dominated by Western forms?
Yes, because you see, all the earlier composers were influenced by Japanese. Because you see, Taiwan had contact with the West really began from 1895 when Japanese came. And before that was 1865, the first missionary came to Tainan. That was the beginning of Taiwanese contact with the West. But then when Japanese came, in 1895, because there was a war between Qing Dynasty and Japan, and then Qing Dynasty was defeated. So Qing Dynasty ceded Taiwan to Japan. So officially from 1895, Taiwan became the colony of Japan. And Japan just began their Meiji Reformation. That means the beginning of Westernization. And their effort were really tried in Taiwan because they came to Taiwan, began to teach Japanese and Western music. So the modernization process actually began with our church in 1865, then reinforced by Japan in 1895. And during that time, all the schools, began to teach Japanese songs, and also Western songs. We were never taught of any Taiwanese music, or Chinese music were taught after the Chinese came over in 1945. In 1946, they were defeated by the communists. So Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan, and they declared Taiwan a province of China. And so they used all the West, Chinese education. And from that time on, we were taught to appreciate, to sing Chinese songs, But then more than half of the Chinese songs are also Westernized with Western harmony. And so in all our environment, everything was Western. So that's why it's very difficult when you can see that there are a lot of pop song composers. So earlier pop song writers, composers imitated Japanese style, the Japanese pop song style with Western influence. And then the recent pop song composers had the influence of Chinese, but also with Western harmony. But then, as you know, with guitar accompaniment is everywhere. So you can hear the melodic idiom, maybe a little bit Taiwanese or a little bit of Chinese. And then the harmony is Western. And once in a while, you hear more avant-garde style, but not in pop music, in ordinary music, but only with the concert orchestras.
Right. That is also interesting.
Yes.
I wonder, I mean, you're certainly well known for your work on contextualization. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit now. What can you talk about contextualization and how you've developed that as a way of a framework for your work?
Yeah, that one is really very difficult, and I really don't know exactly how to put it simply. But the contextualization, actually, the basics of this is the Imago Dei, the creation. We are all created in God's image. But the problem is that all theological education and also liturgy and music, everything we had was from the West. So the incarnation, the God's image is Caucasian, to put it simply, or white. So we all learn that in order to become a Christian, you have to be like a Westerner. So we have the Western clothing, and all our theology, all our hymns were all translated from Western, Bart, Brunner, and Tillich, all those. So during my seminary years, we never had any Asian theology. We only had all the theologies from the West, and we never have any textbook. The texts were all in English, and there was no translation. And so Shogi Ko, our president, he was the one who coined the word contextualization. He was the one who helped us to consider the relationship between gospel and Taiwanese culture, gospel and Taiwanese, identity. And so the incarnation, Christ became flesh. Then Christ should have a yellow flesh, not only white flesh. And so the incarnation means that our gift of creativity from God can be seen from our musical or artistic culture. And then we as Christians, are supposed to create something new from our old Taiwanese tradition, so that people will feel that, oh yes, that is our culture. Yes, Jesus is related to us. So my beginning point, I did not write poetry first. At that time I could not write poetry yet, but I began to compose. That's why I say using 5-tone scale. And actually, the process took place in 1960 when George Todd, I don't know if you know of him, he passed away a few years ago. George Todd was a Presbyterian minister who came to Taiwan in 1959, and Dr. Shogi Ko invited him to help us to see how we could evangelize among the Taiwanese people. So he went out sitting outside with workers and, and going to temples and visit people and trying to know their cultures. So then he sent us to work, not in the church, but in the society, in factories or along the streets. I was the first one to be sent to work among the juvenile delinquent, and he told me, you are not going to preach the gospel there. You are not going to go there and to preach you, but bad boys, you have to do this and that, and then you have to believe in Jesus. No, you just go there to be their friend. Try to understand them, know their interest, know their problems, and see how you can share your experience. And if they ask, then you can explain, but you don't directly preach the gospel. So I was the first one to be working among the juvenile delinquents. And that was the approach. So in 1960, George Todd gave us a passion play, which was performed in Harlem. And it was in English. And then all the songs sang there were Negro spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And so my teacher, Professor Isabel Taylor, she was a Canadian missionary. She was actually my music teacher. She taught me piano and harmony and conducting, and I was her secretary, to translate a lot of songs. And she asked me to translate that passion play into Taiwanese. And so in the process of translation, it occurred to me that when the passion play was performed in Harlem, they used African American spiritual, it's called Negro spiritual. But now it was going to be performed in Taiwan. It has to have yellow spiritual.
Right.
So I began to compose. And my first one was Jesus Walked That Lonesome Valley. That was my first translation. Then I tried to, after I translated that into Taiwanese, then I thought, okay, how do I communicate my yellow spiritual? So I picked up one of the motifs of, excuse me, I have throat problem. So waiting, excuse me, waiting song motif. During the kind of feudal society, a lot of women were oppressed. And when they were depressed, and they tried to sing those songs to cry out all the agonies. And so I picked up just one phrase of that particular wailing song and used that as the motif and first phrase of this Jesus Walked That Lonesome Valley. And I developed that into a new song. So I went and sang to my teacher. She could not understand either. She was a Canadian, and she could speak Taiwanese fluently, but she did not know anything about Taiwanese music. And I explained to her why and how. And she supported. And George Todd also said, yes, that's the way you do it. So I composed all the songs, in Taiwanese style. And then when we were going to perform, the students refused to sing because once they heard my first phrase, they all laughed, say, oh, that's kind of wailing song. How are we going to sing this? Because we were taught to look down on our own culture. Mm-hmm. And so they felt that I was using the kind of culture which Christians are supposed to look down or drop out, but now I'm picking them up to use in the church. So the students, refused to sing. But it took the two professors a long time to persuade the students to sing. And finally, yes, they accepted, and we performed. And after the performance, there were two reactions. One lady, who happened to be my wife, she was only my ordinary friend at that time. She said she had never felt that Jesus was so close to her because, of the music. But then there was my professor. He is now the most famous Asian theologian. I don't want to tell his name. You probably know. He said, Ito, Western music is so beautiful. Why did you use that kind of music? And he has been against my way of contextualization ever since. Even today, theologians in Taiwan are still against what I have been doing because they don't consider those as contextual expression. So my first idea of contextualization is to use my native, Taiwanese culture, musical culture, using their language and their style, and to compose into a new hymn. I don't want to just pick up a pop song, a folk song, and add new text like during Bach's time. What is that word? I forgot. Anyway, it'll come. I did not just adapt the folk song with new text, but I adapt a few notes of the folk motif, mm-hmm. and then create something new. And that's really the meaning of contextualization, using our own language to interpret the meaning of the gospel. So that was my first, approach. But then the problem is harmony. See, as I said, I don't want to use traditional 4-part harmony, and I'm using only those, 3 or 4 chords. So I use counterpoint. But using counterpoint, which is good, because it's a note against note. That means I can develop, either 2 or 3 or 4 parts. I could develop the counterpoint according to the text in different styles. And then you could hear clearly about the meaning of the words, and yet it does not create chords. So my own regulation is that in case, a triad appears in certain beat, in case, but actually it almost never happened, then it has to, jump out right away. So there are no chordal progression, no chordal progression, only counterpoint. And that was my basic approach. But later on, a lot of people criticize me. And so once in a while, I'll compose in a little bit of Western influence, just a little bit, but not totally. But the melody still has the, has the Taiwanese style.
Yeah.
But then after my work, my study at UCLA, ethnomusicology, I learned to appreciate all Asian and global music, and I knew I could, I could understand their idioms and something. So from 1980, I began to compose in Japanese style, or Korean style, or Indian style, or Indonesian style, because I know their folk idioms. So I pick up their idioms or their scales, and I compose new style of music. So my contextualization is now not only Taiwan, but Asia, and also wider world, so sometimes in a piece of music, you don't know where it is from, because I've already utilized a lot of different cultures there. And so I'm not a pure ethnomusicologist. Because a lot of, when I was going to study ethnomusicology, I had nowhere to go in Taiwan because there was no such thing. So I had to go to UCLA to study ethnomusicology. But now there are a lot of ethnomusicology scholars in Taiwan, and they accuse me of breaking the styles of certain ethnic groups. They accuse me of using some Indian songs which does not show the Indian raga. But they don't understand that. And I explain to them that I'm an applied ethnomusicologist. I use the method of ethnomusicology to understand certain cultures. And then I try to pick up the particular style of that particular culture and try to encourage people or myself to create new song, which is no longer pure, ethnic style. It may have some influence from the West or from some others, but that's my contextual expression of Christian, music. And so I'm using this way to help people to understand, as well as helping people to create something new. So people have been criticizing me of going back to history, because they feel that contextualization is going back to history. I said, no, my approach to contextualization is to really learn to know your history, your past, and then pick up the spirit and contextualize it, and to treat it in a modern way. But the modern way is not Western way. So after my teaching about 12 years in Philippines, my slogan, which I told my students, said, contextualization is not the equivalent of Westernization, or modernization is not the equivalent of Westernization, because people have been accusing me of trying to, draw people back to the ancient world, and they say we want to be modern, but their concept of modernization is Westernization, and they use traditional Western chords and guitar to show that they are contemporary. I said, no, that's already the guitar. That kind of style is already 19th century, already far behind the Western modern contemporary. So I said, modernization is not the equivalence of Westernization. That I have been teaching students to know this one. But how? that's up to your creativity. If you want to be westernized, that's okay, because that's your choice. But of course, my effort is trying to help our students to really know our past, know our culture, and also has the skill to create something new. And
Right.
that's my approach to contextualization. It doesn't go back, to the ancient, but
Yes.
bringing the spirit to the contemporary, but not to imitate pop song. If you
Right.
want to imitate, you imitate more avant-garde,
Yeah.
or you create something new, and that's what I'm trying to do. So it's really a long process. The contextualization is never ended. It keeps going and keeps changing, and so I just hope that our people and our churches in Taiwan and Asia will be able to pick up this idea and develop. But
Well,
as you know, it's so difficult.
but I think what you've contributed has influenced people all over the world. And so what began as a Taiwanese project has become something the whole world is able to share in and benefit. We could talk about this all night, but I want to talk a little bit about a couple of other things before we
Yes.
wrap up. One of them is the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. You've had a relationship with us for quite a long time, and I'm wondering if you just talk a little bit about what that's been like for you to be involved with us and with this organization.
Yes. I knew about Hymn Society a long time ago because I have read, the publication, the hymn. But actually, I began to involve the Hymn Society was in 1985, which I attended. The what's called you call that not the assembly, but the
Annual conference.
annual conference.
Yes.
In Jerusalem. Is that Pennsylvania?
Oh, Bethlehem.
Yeah, Bethlehem. Yes.
Bethlehem.
That was why my first attendance was in 1985 in Bethlehem, Philadelphia. During that conference, I present my first paper called "The Emergence of Asian Hymns in Asian Styles," because there are already a lot of Asian hymns, but most of them are in Western style. But after I came, I went to Philippines. In 1982, I taught at the Asian Institute for Liturgy and Music. I recruited students from different countries. I also went to many different countries to study, to collect their songs, and so I began to collect, to understand Asian styles. And so during that conference, I gave my first kind of very preliminary, explanation of the emergence of Asian hymns in Asian styles. Because a lot of people, when they say Asian hymns, you only say the hymns were composed by Asian. But most of the hymns, I would say probably more than 90% of the hymns composed by Asians are or were in Western styles. The melody and the harmony. Very few of them have some Asian idioms.
Right.
And so that was my first presentation. And then I was invited to the 1999 conference in Vancouver.
Yes.
To introduce Asian hymns. And Pablo Sosa and Patrick Matsukenire are also there to teach Latin American hymns and African songs. So that was the first time that I was able to, introduce more Asian hymns, but of course not in depth because we're mostly singing, yeah. And but then I was a keynote speaker in Colorado Springs in 2011. So my topic was Sound of Mystic Bamboo Song, Sounds and Images of Christ in Asian Hymns, and which I'm sure you were there. And later on it was published in the hymns also. So it was the first time that I was able to discuss more in depth the important theological contents, the imageries and musical natures and styles of ancient hymns. But I still wonder how many hymnologists have continued to pay attention to these repertoire and use them in their institutions or in their churches. And then, of course, the last one was the Hymn Society's centennial conference, in Washington, and Michael Horn interviewed me with the title called "Sounds of Bamboo: The Life and Legacy of I-to Loh." So I hope that all these events, hopefully, have made more theologians and ministers and musicians in the West and around the globe to understand and appreciate Asian contributions in hymns.
Yes, well, I think that absolutely is true. I mean, when I first came to work as executive director, one of our board members was Sui Hong Lim, who is who bears a lot of your influence and has helped to continue to make people aware and conscious
Right.
of
Yes.
Asian contributions. So
yeah, he was actually my top students in Asian Institute. So I'm very glad for his achievements. And also he taught in your schools. Also invited me to teach to speak once at your former school, right? Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
He's an amazing scholar and
right.
And a never-ending source of inspiration. So
right.
I do want to have one last question. May I, if I may? So
sure.
And I ask this to everybody we interview. What would be your fondest hope for the Hymn Society in the years ahead?
Well, I hope teaching and promoting global hymns among ecumenical churches to let people see the beauty and wonder of God's creation, as well as finding peace, justice, and hope around the world through the loving kindness of Jesus Christ. I'm simplified with this, and I really appreciate the Hymn Society's work in continuing publication of the hymns, which is very important because it will give people a kind of a standard, an ideal, and encouragement of composing new hymns. So I feel that if this is very important. But then may I ask also one question, because the praise chorus is so popular right now. I hope that maybe the Hymn Society could be more critical about the quality of CCM, or praise and worship songs, and would somehow discourage the export of those songs to the third world. I know it's very difficult, but at least if more members of the Hymn Society could be more critical about that and try to kind of discourage them to export so much of them to our churches, I really would appreciate it, because there's no way we can do anything about it, because people like all those, they can buy it and they can have the recording, they can sing right away and they enjoy it, and they don't care anything about what's happening. They don't care about our own situation or our own culture. They only care about they are already up to date to the Western pop style. That's
it does seem like there's a new colonization going on
right
through the spread of this music, right?
Yes.
So I hear you, and I know that there are people very interested in pursuing that.
Yes. But again, I really appreciate the support of Hymn Society. So at least I feel that there's a world organization which is interested and concerned about what I am doing, and so that really gives me a lot of encouragement. So I still fight. Yes. I still compose new ones, and I hope that more people eventually would come to realize the Imago Dei in us can be seen today as a, through yellow spiritual.
Well said. And I just want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing, and for the inspiration that you've given us, and for this very, very delightful conversation tonight. I've really enjoyed
thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have talked too much. Yeah,
not at all. Not at all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks so much, and thank you all for joining us tonight. If you would like to write to Ito, you can use his email address that's being put in the chat, and or just write something in the chat, and we're going to be transmitting all of that to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.